So thanks for joining me today, Catherine. It's lovely to see you.
Nice to be here with you.
I'm Sue Fox, a trustee at the Psychosynthesis Trust. Catherine, you're a researcher, psychosynthesis psychologist, author and counsellor, and you also run workshops.
Yes.
And I know through our recent conversations that your writing is something that's really close to your heart, and that you've contributed greatly to psychosynthesis, only recently having finished a translation, a collection of essays and lectures that I think will be shortly published.
Yes, it's a collection of 20 lectures by Roberto Assagioli, ones he gave in 1933 and 34, and later in the 60s. And it was published 55 years ago in Italian, but it's never been translated into any other language. I think there might be a Spanish edition, but it's the first time in English.
So that's something we really look forward to.
Yes, it's a beautiful little book, very special book.
I'm looking forward to reading that. And also, of course, Freedom in Jail, Assagioli's Prison Diaries. And I know that you run workshops on that. But maybe perhaps before we move into your writing, I wonder if you could share a little bit about your own personal journey towards how you came across psychosynthesis and the impact that had on you.
Yes, it was about 25 years ago, and I was just, I just met my husband to be, I didn't know he was going to be my husband, but Kees, a Dutch man, and he had in his library 2 books, and for some reason, I pulled them out, and I have them here still. I don't know if you can see them.
Oh yeah, Transpersonal Development and the Psychology with the Soul.
And so I read first Transpersonal Development, and I was just like stunned. This is my spiritual journey. This resonates so close to my heart and soul, and I have to read more about psychosynthesis. And that's how I got started. And then I read everything I could get my hands on that Assagioli had written.
And I know I came across you in London when you were training. How did you end up in training?
Well, my husband was finishing his own PhD, and I felt like, okay, it's my turn to do something that interests me in a serious way. And we were living in Italy at the time, but we were looking to move to the Northern European country. So I thought with English, it would be the easiest thing would be for me to study in London. So that's how I ended up in London studying psychosynthesis.
So when was that?
I graduated in 2012. I started in 2007.
Okay, so that was, I'm just trying to get the timeline. So that was after you attended this writer's retreat that you went on in around 92?
Yes, much later, yeah.
And that writer's retreat, was that the starting point of you finding your voice through writing?
No, I've always written. As far back as I can remember. In fact, I have a little newspaper that I put together when I was like 8 or 9, the neighborhood news. And so I was always observing others and writing and taking note of what was happening around me and trying to process what I think was happening around me in writing. And so it wasn't that particular workshop wasn't the first time I had explored my inner life through writing. I was always busy writing and trying to make sense of my world through my writing.
Because of course, Assagioli, that was one of his explicit techniques, wasn't it? Writing, getting somebody to write their autobiography or just writing, because it reveals perhaps questions that a person may have. It's how the unconscious can reveal itself there's always the conscious story, and then you get the unconscious story coming through. And he often, did he not talk about that writing also sped up the healing process?
Yes, it's a way of exploring places that you maybe didn't realize were there to be explored. Yeah. I think it's kind of equivalent to going on a hike in a way. Like you start on the hike, you have a certain idea of where you're going, but then this little trail shows up, or maybe you see a flower that you didn't recognize before or never saw before. And so things start to open up as soon as you start moving in space. You discover things that you didn't know existed before. And it's the same with writing. And especially if you're writing by hand, I think things in the body can be released more easily than on a computer or your cell phone or whatever. Although I do write now mostly on the computer, but I have stacks of journals that I kept, boxes of journals that I've kept over the years. So a lot, I think, can happen. And I mean, Assagioli, that's in Freedom in Jail, actually, he missed very much having paper, because while he was in jail, they were only allowed to write letters 2 days a week and on stationery given to them by the prison. So he didn't have all the paper available to him. If you've ever been to Casa Assagioli, you know there's like tens of thousands of slips of paper. And his motto was, better to burden the paper than the mind. So also, it's not just discovering new paths or new areas to further explore, but it's also about unburdening yourself of the energies that might be held in these thoughts that you have ready to go on the paper. So I think it's a beautiful motto, actually, because often I'm like in the middle of the night with lists of things or ideas or sudden insights, and I will get up and write them down, knowing that I'll be able to sleep unburdened.
On little Post-it notes like Assagioli?
Actually, I have, but on little note paper like this, but I also have a notebook. It just kind of depends. Yeah.
I mean, I like the metaphor you used of going for a hike and seeing a flower, because what I really, and I've said this to you before, what I really love about your writing is that you weave in psychosynthesis, but the essence of your writing is always, for me personally, very deeply soulful and moving. It's not a kind of intellectual exercise.
Thank you, Sue, thank you for that.
Why that's important, why that matters, I think, because it's the difference between the kind of theory and embodying the practice of self-expression and creativity through that medium.
Yeah, I don't consciously try to weave the soulful experience with teaching, but I think it's kind of selfishly, I'm trying to understand what's happening to me and looking for psychosynthesis concepts that might work in my life.
Yes, because so you recently wrote this piece, "Where's My Umbrella?" about your friend, and it seemed that within that you were also trying to perhaps evoke answers to some questions you had about that situation and seeing it through the lens of psychosynthesis.
Yes, trying to make sense of the world. I mean, a lot of times things don't make sense and will never make sense. And for me, writing is a way to at least unburden myself of the many threads that are coming through and trying to make sense of a certain event.
And are you willing, it's fine not to, but are you willing to talk a little bit about the writing you did around your father and what that process was like?
Well, I don't, about my father. He was murdered when I was 15 years old, and it was in 1970. So it wasn't a time where you had family therapy or group therapy or anything. So my family never really processed anything that happened to us, and that was a huge burden to carry for many, many years. And it was at a writing workshop that I made the decision. Enough was enough, and I was going to unburden my mind and put all my feelings and memories on paper. And so the workshop was Let the Crazy Child Write, which was perfect because it was like a wild child inside me, trying to make sense of what had happened to her many years ago. I think I was 35, or it was like 20 years after the event. And so it was at a hot spring resort in California, and the Damascus trees were blooming, and everyone was naked, wallowing in the muddy waters. So physically I was naked, and so it became the next step was to emotionally become naked. And I had the insight to rent a private room. So I went to my room and cried and cried and cried all over paper as I was writing. And it was a huge, huge release, and really started me on a very long and deep journey to coming to terms with my father's murder.
I'm sure. And I know from our conversations, you've got a couple of projects in the pipeline.
Yeah, I did write my spiritual journey many, many years ago as part of starting psychosynthesis. It was a way, Assagioli says one of the first things is to write your spiritual autobiography. And so I did. And no one's really seen it. So I'm thinking of rewriting it in a new voice, with a little more maturity, 25 years more maturity. That's one project. And then the other is I've been very fascinated with the relationship between Assagioli and Tagore and their spiritual philosophies. And I recently gave a talk for a conference in Budapest, and I have a paper being published by the Journal of Indian Religion and Philosophy. The Journal of Indian Philosophy and Religion has accepted the paper. So I want to continue working on that very fascinating, two fascinating figures in a fascinating period of history. And I think also Assagioli wrote 3 articles on Tagore that have never been translated. So that would become part of the book as well. His 3 articles on Tagore.
Wow, that sounds great. I look forward to reading both those. Thank you so much. We'll be speaking again. We're going to be doing a series of these. And yeah, thanks very much.
You're welcome, Sue. Thank you for your time and wonderful questions.